Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 168 of a very extremely wicked, a very shockingly evil, and the most vile podcast on the internet.
We're not vile.
We are none of those. Maybe a little wicked. Not extremely, just a little wicked. We are the Backlot 605 podcast. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Casey Kelderman. Join with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Brian Mensing, and the vile part of this show, Sam Lenz.
One's wicked, one's...
I accept this with honor.
He's okay. You can be the vile one. I'm okay with that one. Who's the wicked one?
Yeah. I don't know. Is it all me? I'm the bad seed.
You're not shockingly evil, though. You're just evil.
Yeah, I'm just evil.
Yeah, there's nothing shocking about that.
What's that? Like chaotic good, neutral good, good, or whatever. I'm like neutral evil.
Mm-hmm. The only thing
I use my
shocking
evil for both sides
about this episode is Sam is not wearing his hippie do-rag on this episode.
I know, it's weird.
That's the only thing shocking.
I lost it. Well, I didn't lose it. I know it's somewhere, but it's not in my possession right now. I have to find it.
It's in my other hand. You're gonna have one of those days, Sam, where you're just gonna be like, "Oh, it's right there."
You're
gonna be like my 7-year-old. I can't find it, as it's literally right in front of you.
Yeah. Oh, I know that it's in probably the most obvious place. I just can't find it.
Well, boys, we have reached the climax of True Crime Month here for the month of January.
I'm just going to say this before we get into the whole true crime thing. Next January, we're doing like comedies or something, because I can't do another January of this shit. Oh my God, guys.
I do want to point out, though, too, after Derek and I went through our bonus episode of top true crime, basically movies based on actual events that were crimes and whatnot, we decided to do nothing but murder. And guess what? There's murder in some of the ones that we went over in terms of like the top grossing of all time. But we decided that murder must have just been like our de facto, like it had to be true crime. The murder had to be involved because like there was like, Catch Me If You Can is like the number one grossing true crime and whatnot. And all of a sudden, we immediately was like, you know what? Dead people have to exist.
I don't put that in true crime. That's a different genre to me. That's like a heist. Like those are different types of movies to me.
Wolf of Wall Street is a true crime.
It is a true crime movie. Yeah. I wouldn't put it in the same category as Bully, though.
Well, of course not. There's no murder involved. Yeah, there's probably murder involved.
I know it sounds like weird, but I think I would have rather watched Wolf of Wall Street than any of the movies we watched this month.
Well, Sam, next year we will go back to something more lighthearted like we did last January when we did Monty Python movies. This will be an alternating thing. Then the year after, we're just going to go just as dark and we're going to talk only Kevin Spacey movies.
Oh, God. Oh, ouch.
All right, so we don't want to have a podcast
here we come.
after January 2024. Like that's our deadline. That's when our podcast is done because we're going to get canceled.
As soon as we do a Kevin Spacey month, for sure we will.
You know what we should do? Chris Farley month.
We should have done it this month for the 25th anniversary of Beverly Hills Ninja, the all-time classic Farley movie.
We'll do it for the 26th anniversary next year.
You don't have to say that twice.
I would just like to point out that movie's 25 years old and I have never seen it.
I actually haven't seen that one either. So
it's good. It's good. I mean, it's not going on to a Chris Farley tangent. It's not Tommy Boy. It's not Black Sheep.
Yeah.
It's a fun Chris Farley 90s comedy.
It's live action Kung Fu Panda, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the Kung Fu Panda movies, so I'm sure I'll love Beverly Hills Ninja.
But we're not talking Beverly Hills Ninja. That's a movie for a different time, and it is a rule in one of our games that we play on Backlot 605, the Beverly Hills Ninja rule. How does that
Yep.
apply? You'll have to listen to a live show to find out. But today we're talking about the newest movie in our series of true crime movies this month. We are talking Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Also the longest titled movie of this series.
Like one of the worst titles of all time. It's
What was
such a
the-
bad
what-
one.
What was the purpose?
I like the
what-
title.
I don't mind the title, but where was the purpose? Like, where does it stem from? Because I know this is based off a book. So
It's-
I mean,
John Malkovich says the
Yeah,
title
like the
at
judge.
what? I know where the
The
where
judge
the line
in real
comes
life
from.
actually describes.
Yeah.
Like that's an actual
Yeah.
thing that the judge said in real life to describe the crimes.
Mhm.
And
Well,
I think
and
that's just. Yeah.
I will even go as far as saying, like, there's parts of the dialogue in this movie where I'm like, would this really happen? To like that borderline of, is it artistic license versus what actually happened kind of thing. And then we get to the end credits when they're actually showing
Mhm.
like actual reels and stuff like
the
that.
real footage.
Yeah, the real footage. Because one of the first things I thought of was the John Malkovich when we're hearing the judge
His
talking. And I'm like,
monologue at the end.
yep, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Because there, you can definitely get a little bit of John Malkovich out of what John is doing, but you can clearly tell he's doing what the judge. Because at first I was like, why is he talking like that? And then you get that little bit at the end. You're like, now I understand.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, and that goes into something I want to start off right away. So we're talking Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. We're just going to call it the Ted Bundy movie, so we don't have to keep saying that.
I was gonna say,
title.
how many times are you gonna say that in an hour?
This movie is directed by Joe Berlinger. Berlinger? I think it's Berlinger. Who is
Mhm.
known for, he's kind of the king of true crime documentaries. You think of a true crime documentary, he probably had his hand in it in one way, shape, or form. And I mean, this is obviously the movie that everybody talked about. Oh my God, Zac Efron's playing Ted Bundy, a serial killer. It's that
you
movie.
mean the guy from High School Musical is gonna play Ted Bundy?
He does, and we'll
Here's-
get to it. And
Yeah.
What, Sam?
what do you got, Sam?
Here's the thing, like Efron for a long time, even before this, was putting in really good performances, even in pretty mediocre movies.
Mhm.
I don't know if you guys remember like
Baywatch.
the Charlie. Well, yeah, okay. I love him in Baywatch. I don't love that movie, but I think he's hilarious in it.
Yes, me too.
Charlie St. Cloud, that movie is not very good. He brings me to tears in that movie. Like he is so freaking good. So like when people were like, "Oh, he's getting a chance to act," I'm like, "Have you guys not been watching it?" I'm sorry. Like even stuff like Dirty Grandpa, like this guy is showing that he has range. You know.
Mhm.
Neighbors is the big one.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Neighbors.
Dirty Grandpa and Baywatch. Neighbors is the big Zac Efron comedy.
Not
breakout.
even Neighbors. Neighbors 2. He's even better in Neighbors 2. Like that might be my favorite Zac Efron performance. Maybe not his best, but I think it's my favorite because he nails the comedy and the drama in that script so well.
And
He
sometimes-
balances it perfectly.
And sometimes I wonder if he did some of these oddball comedies to try to shed some of that Disney
Mhm.
like
Oh,
wholesomeness.
for sure.
Like him and Adam Devine doing Dave and Mike wedding movie.
Oh
and
yeah,
the
Mike and Dave need wedding dates.
Neighbors
Yeah.
was the big one where
Neighbors.
he's like, yeah, I'm doing a Seth Rogen comedy because I can't keep being the romantic lead in in a romantic dramedy or being in these like
or a musical.
blockbuster kids movies. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is again why one of the reasons why when I heard that, okay, yeah, we're making a Ted Bundy movie. Okay, yes, we're putting Zac Efron on it. That excited me because that is something where it's like, okay, give him something to be able to chew on that isn't going to be like, oh, it's the Disney kid, it's the high school musical kid. Give him something to get that range, and realize,
Mhm.
he can be more than just, like you said, the romantic dramedies of the early years. Like he could easily have
Yeah.
been pigeonholed.
Well, and I mean, I'll say like he puts in a performance that I mean, I know he wasn't picked up for a lot of awards, but he gives like an awards worthy performance in
Mhm.
a movie that unfortunately, like to me, never lives up to that performance. Like, I think this is a really, like, this is a career best performance stuck in a very ill-constructed movie.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
one of
like
those.
the way this movie is structured. I don't like the way it portrays its characters for most of the runtime. I don't like that they say like, "Oh, this is based on the book by Elizabeth." I can't remember her last name now, but you know
Kaplan
his
or
fiance. Yeah,
Elizabeth Kendall.
Kendall. There you go.
Elizabeth Kendall. That's what it is. Yeah, Elizabeth Kendall. I hate that they're like, "Oh, it's based on like the memoir she wrote about it," and she's an afterthought in this entire movie. Like Lily Collins acts so well in this. Like her performance, you see where she could go with this, and the movie just very frustratingly cuts her off at the knees by just being so disinterested in anything that she's doing.
I heartily disagree on that. She
Oh my
is
god.
the actual heart of this movie.
Yeah.
That scene at the end of the movie is the culmination of both of these two people finally coming together after all these years of being so far apart. And we'll get to it. We got to jump
Yeah.
into the plot
Yeah.
first. Yeah,
We
we're
have
gonna have very different
differing
opinions.
thoughts on this. We have very
Uh,
different thoughts on
The
this.
the plot. Ted Bundy killed people. We know that part.
Yeah, so this is based off the real life serial killer of Ted Bundy, an extremely charming, charismatic, wicked, horrible human being who evaded police for a decade while committing heinous crimes against mostly young single women on college campuses. He is the inspiration for a lot of movie characters, Buffalo Bill being one of them. If you remember the scene of Buffalo Bill convincing a girl to help him like load a couch into his car because he has a cast on. Well, that was Ted Bundy in real life trying to convince young women to help him while he was faking that he had an injury with the cast. But this movie follows his real life relationship with Elizabeth Kendall, played by Lily Collins, who, for me, they have a true that's the entry point for this movie. We're not following Ted Bundy's rise to infamy and stuff like that. We're start off right away with these two meeting up and hitting it off right away. And the first time we get to see these two together, Ted Bundy and Elizabeth spend the night together, and then her child, she is a single mother, goes missing, only to find the child in the kitchen with Ted, and him being like Dad Efron, the first sign of that, which we need more of. Keep it up, Hollywood. We need some more Dad Efron.
Dad Efron, like in the Firestarter remake.
Keep it up. But this movie basically follows him like as he's getting caught and evading police multiple times and escaping from prison multiple times. En route to these two, where Elizabeth finally figures out that Ted Bundy, the man she thought she knew, is actually this one of the most heinous people in the history of this country, and leads to the culmination of those two finally coming face to face after a decade plus of not seeing or speaking to each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're telling me, I'm just trying to get this straight here. You're telling me that you genuinely think like the character of Liz is the heart of this movie, like that here's the thing. I enjoy the setup where it's like, oh wow, like it already, like, you know who Ted Bundy is when this movie starts. But when it starts, it's portraying him as just this like kind of charming guy that meets her in this bar. There's like, yeah, like you said, there's an air of menace about it until you realize like, oh wow, like maybe he actually cares about this girl. And then it goes right into the Ted Bundy going to trial and killing people and all this kind of thing. And to me, it for the longest time, Lily Collins is just so inconsequential to the rest of the movie. Like they throw her a scene or two here or there, but the big stuff is Efron escaping, Efron like doing his own defending at trial, and the movie's so focused on that, and that's where the movie really comes alive. Especially like the courtroom scenes are incredible, but every time it cuts back to Lily, it seems as though Berlinger is just showing that just to be like, see, this is a different angle that we're doing, but I don't really care about this. Let's move back to the Efron stuff. I just feel like throughout the movie, there's this ratio of like, if she truly was supposed to be the co-lead of this movie, she would be in it more, or her scenes would have more of an impact. Because I agree with you that last scene is incredible, but for me, it loses something because I just don't feel like we've seen her grapple with this enough. You know what I mean?
See, I don't know. I'm almost kind of listening to you guys kind of give your sides of it here. I see where you're going with Casey. But I also see where you're going with Sam, because the way I actually kind of I process it in my brain here is that there's two kind of aspects to this here, and the part is that one is being portrayed by one and one's being portrayed by the other, and that is the over exuberance of all the charisma that we get out of Efron, but the heart and the heartbreak that we're getting out of Lily Collins, and that all of the scenes that we have with her, they don't seem to pop like Efron's do, because his is so much full of all that charisma, all that the high that you're getting out of it. All of hers are the over the years, all the time. She's got that heartbreak. She's got the low, the heartbreak, the coming to the realization that, because we don't see until the very end why she is kind of running through all this, and she goes from picking up the phone to maybe picking up the phone to ignoring the phone to unplugging the phone because she just can't deal with it anymore. So I think that's where maybe there's a little bit of disconnect for you, because he gets the highs, she gets the lows.
Yeah.
I'll say this. I do think it is probably the weakest part, as soon as you split these two up, of what they do with Elizabeth's character. I don't think it's bad.
Yeah.
I think it is the weaker part, and I think that's just because in real life and in this story, and people who know Ted Bundy's story, what's the most interesting part of that story?
Yeah.
It is Ted Bundy. Not that we're saying he's a good guy or that we want to follow him. It's the type of person that he was, and I think what the movie does really great is setting up Zac Efron, who I think is perfect casting for this.
I agree.
don't know. I really don't know who else would play this. We made a joke before.
Glenn Howerton.
Why? But Glenn Howerton plays Ted Bundy on It's Always Sunny. We don't need to see him do it in a movie. He's done it on the TV show for 15 years.
It's the implication.
It's the implication. I'm sure Ted Bundy used the dentist system one point or the other. But I think Zac Efron, and why he's so perfect, is that, we know Zac Efron from High School Musical, those fun comedies like we were talking about. We Are Your Neighbors, We Are Your Friends is the one that came to mind.
Oh God, yeah. That one isn't like a raunchy comedy though. That movie gets fucking dark.
Yeah. And all the other
the one for me that made me realize that Zac Efron isn't the guy I know from High School Musicals, when he did that awkward moment with Imogen Poots and Michael B. Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he's incredible in that movie.
Because when there's the whole, like, the one guy walking in on him, I'm like, okay, this is not the Zach that I come to loathe from the Disney stuff, because like the Disney stuff, it was so force fed to you to the point where, like, I've never seen a High School Musical movie, but I have no interest because of the way Disney was force feeding that franchise. Absolutely, Sam. But I also come from a different time than you two do.
Man, that was all the rage in middle school, High School Musical.
Exactly. Your middle school was me already out of school.
If it was 2006 and you weren't bumping the High School Musical 2 soundtrack on your like portable CD player, you weren't cool.
Brian, you just got to get your head in the game.
I would have been creepy. I would have been my mid-20s going, yeah, I'm digging out that Disney stuff.
But that's the point I'm trying to
with
make.
no kids.
Is that we know this Zac Efron, and that's why he's so perfectly cast in this, because when he does have those darker moments and you see the underlying layers, it's like, oh my God, there's something behind those eyes, and it's scary.
Yeah.
That's
When
and
he
that's why you need
flips the switch and like you see the anger come in, he does
Yeah.
it so subtly, and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, there's something like deeply
Disturbing.
fucked up about this guy. You know,
Mhm.
like yeah.
And I think
I do take umbrance though with the idea that the interesting part of this story is Bundy, just because we've heard the Bundy side of things so many times.
yeah,
For
we
it
have.
to have just like made Bundy the side character in this and focused and actually done something cool with Lily Collins and like Haley Joel Osment, like who he feels like an afterthought in this movie too. Like I feel like he's literally just there to be an extra person in scenes with her.
Yeah, he's the worst character in this movie, by far.
And it's disappointing because to me that aspect of like a psychologically tormented character by this idea of like, is this man that I thought I loved, who I was the one who like I turned him in, I started this chain of events. I think that's the most interesting angle this movie has, and I think it spends so little time on it that like that's this movie almost kind of bores me because I've seen the Ted Bundy tapes. I know all this stuff. You know what I know? Like the Ted Bundy tapes did a better job of covering the Ted Bundy story than this movie does.
Well,
But this movie also
well,
won't
I mean,
commit
it
to
is the
telling the
Ted.
other story.
It is the Ted Bundy tapes. I mean, that's
Right.
It's the
But that's
movie
what
Joe
I'm-
Berlinger made literally right before
Yeah.
this too. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
But
He did the story in a better way already, and then
I
just did
I
it
think
watered down.
the movie
know?
does a good job of Elizabeth's character for what you can do with it in a feature movie, because you got to look at,
Disagree.
as an audience, what are you going to go watch this movie for? You're going to go watch it to watch Zac Efron play Ted Bundy. And that's
Yeah,
why
but
that's what this movie is known for.
Yeah.
But you watch
and I
Silence
think
of the Lambs to watch Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, and he's in that movie for 12 fucking minutes.
Sam, I'm not
You
comparing
know what I mean?
this movie to Silence
No,
of the Lambs.
I'm just saying. You
Sam
watch
just
The Dark
compared
Knight
Efron to
for
Anthony
Heath
Hopkins.
Ledger's. I would compare Efron to Hopkins because Efron is an incredible actor. He's underrated. But like, think about it. Some of the greatest performances are used so sparingly. Like you look at like, Heath Ledger in the Batman. I think that he has like 14 minutes of actual screen time in that entire like 2.5 hour movie. And he's the part that everybody comes back to. You can still have a Zac Efron performance that brings in the crowd and spend more time with Lily Collins. You know what I mean?
I think she gets a ton of screen time. I think she probably has at least half of the screen time of this movie. There's some IMDb stats somewhere out there. She
There
has
might
a
be.
very good amount of screen time.
I would love to be
I
able to
just
find
feel
those
like-
numbers.
But
I just feel like directorially and even from like a framing standpoint, like from a filmmaking standpoint, all of her scenes just seem to be like flatter. They just seem to be like, we're going to shoot these just to shoot these, just to have them in the movie, just to pad something out.
I think
That's the vibe
I'll,
I get every time we cut back to her.
I'll agree with Brian. I think those are on purpose, that we're supposed to feel like gross and kind of out of the loop, at least in those points, because she is out of the loop, and it takes her
I can see
15 years to figure out like and finally come to terms with the man who she was dating for years and loved was the most heinous man in the United States, and I think that's one thing that this movie does really well, is that it is Zac Efron playing Ted Bundy. It's the Ted Bundy movie. It's also about Ted Bundy's girlfriend, Elizabeth. And I think it does a good job balancing the two. And I think the perfect balance comes because we don't ever see Zac Efron commit any of these crimes.
Yeah.
And I
Until
think
the
that's
very
a
end.
good choice of this movie, of not just following Ted Bundy. Like, we could have followed Ted Bundy from his teens and now he's going to law school. Never mind. He's not. He's just murdering sorority girls. And then we get halfway through it, we meet Elizabeth. no, this movie starts right there, and that's the emotional core, and that's our through line through the movie. Of we're not following Ted Bundy through this story, we're following Ted Bundy's story through the eyes of Elizabeth, like how she portrays him. How, again, I think one of the best parts of this movie is how the media portrays him as well, because he is this charismatic enigma where he just he's the first trial they ever put on live TV to watch, and people fell in love with this guy. He had the crowd of people in the courtroom too of falling for him. The judge falls for him. It was like, man, I wish in another life, son, you would be different and you wouldn't have done this stuff. It's like, no, this guy killed at least 30 people. Don't talk to him like that.
Or the fact that we're talking acknowledged 30 females, and yet, it was the female crowd that was just swooning over him to the point where, the majority of the circus that was in the courtroom was a predominantly, female crowd, because they wanted to get their eyes on the dreamy Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that this movie does a bad job of portraying that.
No.
I just question why they need to, when Berlinger literally put out an actual docuseries that did, like, it gave all this information better. Like, it told this story in a better way. And
because he's got a human crush on Zac Efron like you do, and he wanted to make a movie.
Yeah, like, I don't know. We get
Efron butt in this, guys. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, he is hot. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, he's ridiculously attractive.
And I would like to point out that the comment that I made about your Letterboxd review, I had already read the Letterboxd review and then made that comment just because I wanted to.
Well, like, and Efron is like, he's so good in this. Like I said, his performance is the thing that keeps you hooked into this movie. And I think that's the issue that I have with it, is it feels very much like there are entire sections of this movie that, even though it's like told from Liz's perspective, like, there are scenes that, like, the whole scene between him and Kaya Scaldario's character in the like break room where they screw behind the soda machine, and then he's like gaslighting her and all this stuff, and like, that's not anything from Liz's perspective, like, there are these tonal shifts and these point of view shifts that throughout are just jarring, because I'm like, okay, whose story are we following? Are we following Liz? Are we following Ted? Are we following this other person? Like, who's supposed to be the emotional center? Because every time you seem to get one, all of a sudden you're switching to a different one for me. You know what I mean?
I'll adamantly disagree on that scene, especially because I think she is a vital character for the story. The what's her name? Susan,
yeah.
Well, and she's a vital character for this story, and again, I think helps build
for the story this movie is telling, yes, but not for the story that this movie claims that it's telling.
This movie is claiming to be the Ted Bundy movie starring Zac Efron. It's
based on claiming to be based on a memoir by a character that's barely a side character.
It is, but at that point, you have an hour and 50-minute long movie of this woman who used to date Ted Bundy, and it shows all the good times, and then all of a sudden he's gone, and then you just sit there and have her watching TV. Like, I don't know what you can do to make a whole movie about it.
Casey, you literally just watched Spencer and gave it like 3.5 stars, and that's what that
I gave this movie 3.5 stars too.
a lot of those 3.5 stars were the performance, not necessarily the movie.
Yes, that's fair.
I think having all these other perspectives and getting us as the audience to know who Ted Bundy was. Like, let's say you're someone who's like, I don't know who Ted Bundy is. I'm gonna click onto this Zac Efron movie, and you're watching.
Sure a lot of people did that.
And you watch it and you fall in love with Zac Efron, and you're like, yeah, he probably didn't do all this stuff. I'm kind of with him. I'm rooting for him. Like, oh, he could have been framed. Maybe it's that type of story and type of thing. And when things start to unravel more and more, you're with Elizabeth's character at that point of all this stuff is unraveling before your eyes after you've already fell in love with this guy, and you're like falling for his charm and his charisma and his manipulative nature, which I think is perfect for Susan, showing that side of, and I don't want to say this, his maybe him being in love with Elizabeth, and then having Susan come in and kind of just be, well, I'm just going to sleep with you just because I've been in jail for years and need to sleep with someone, and you're going to go to the press for me and show I'm a good guy and I'm not a bad person. I could never commit these crimes. And and for me that seems like something he wouldn't do to Elizabeth, but he has manipulated her in many other ways, and maybe the most heinous way of all, of just making her believe he's just a good guy. And that's terrifying to know that this man who killed close to 100 people was able and capable of doing that.
Yeah,
I think a lot about what that, especially that scene with Susan and whatnot, is that's definitely the showing of the hand, where basically he's using all that charisma, he's using that charm of his, of being able to, like you said, Sam, the gaslighting. He's basically saying the same thing to her that he said to Elizabeth, to the point where he's like, Elizabeth clearly is not coming back. I need somebody on my side to show me, to show the people of the things that I can't say, to show how manipulative he really is and whatnot. Like honestly, I see that gaslighting as, done on purpose. Between that and also showing that, during all this, when he's supposedly, still in love with Elizabeth, he goes and, basically bears another child in the process.
Yeah.
Which would be all things that Lily would find out about, and in turn, push her to the point where she is towards that end of that movie, where she's just basically like, I can't do this anymore. I need my own closure. That's why she brings the photo.
Yeah.
And I think that's why us as an audience need to follow him maybe a little bit more than her. One, I think it is unfortunately the most interesting story, and that's just because as an American culture, we're obsessed with true crime and murder.
Yeah.
Like
just a little bit. I mean, we did a whole month on it. Joe Berlinger, whatever. He lives in it.
Made an entire career of it. Yeah, I think we as a culture are just obsessed with it. And so to show that side of it, and I think done tastefully, because we're not exploiting it, we're not glamorizing it, we're not promoting it, we're showing how despicable this person is. Not necessarily by showing all these heinous acts in kind of a Hollywood way. No, we're showing how manipulative and influential in the wrong way that Ted Bundy was. Like, this guy is a guy who tried to run for like governor, or he ran for political office in like Washington State, I think.
Yeah.
Like, he's that type of person. You would vote for this guy to represent you in the community just because he has that type of natural charisma and knows what to say. He's a very intellectual human being. I mean, by the end of this movie, he's his own lawyer. He's representing himself. Why would that be allowed to happen?
Because you have that. That is an option that you can have in the court of law.
Yeah, but when you murder 30 people, you probably don't get to represent yourself.
You do if you're a law student.
And it's out after. There's a lot of
he probably didn't drop out.
He can't find a lawyer who will get along with him. Like, his lawyer literally, he tries to fire him and his lawyer quits. What are they gonna do? Bring in another lawyer and have it disrupt the process again? Like, at a certain point, you just have to be like, fine, fuck it, let the guy dig his own grave.
Just to put
here's the thing. I disagree with they don't glorify Bundy in this, because there are scenes like the scene where he humiliates his lawyer that are played like with such pizzazz and vigor that it's like, haha, look at this guy. And it's like, I get that you're trying to be like, he was charming and he did all, but I'm like, this feels like you're too flashy with it. Like, it feels like you're like, hey, look at Ted Bundy. He was kind of funny. He was like,
he was funny. That's the scariest thing. I think that's why, to me, he's one of, if not the scariest, like, true life serial killers. Because you could walk down the street, you could walk into the grocery store and have a normal ass conversation with this dude, and you're like, this guy is cool. I like him. I would like to get a beer with him. And he's gonna walk outside that store and kidnap a 17-year-old girl and do heinous things. Like, that's the scariest part to me, because he is a charming, funny individual. Like, it shows it at the end of this movie, like the news stories. I'm like, yeah, no wonder the news wanted to cover this guy all the time. He is,
especially the actual footage when they're reading off the indictment. Because again, that was one of those scenes where I was like, this just seems like it's way too flashy. When Zac Efron's coming out and he's, talking kind of down with the district attorney, and then they actually show the actual of that actually happened. I'm like, okay, so there are parts of this movie where I'm like, that seems a little over the top, a little flashy and whatnot. And then you see the actual footage and whatnot, and you realize that there's probably a little bit more of an underlying, this actually happened that way. Where does the movie look like it's glorifying? Absolutely. Granted, now watching, I don't know if I'll ever get to that docuseries that he did beforehand, but even just watching those little bits at the very end makes me realize it looks glorified. And comparative to us doing Bully last week, this is obviously very glorified in comparison. But considering the subject matter and the people we're talking about, though, Ted Bundy was a very glorified, charismatic, person, to the point where it just comes off that way.
Yeah. The issue is, though, like, the movie doesn't have any underlying menace to it through most of it. It has it in the opening. When he meets her, you're like, oh my God, like, he's not going to kill her, but there's that, like, will he, won't he type of thing when he picks her up at the jukebox. And then at the very end, when he confesses to her and he writes hacksaw in the window, which is a bone-chilling scene. Mm-hmm. The best scene in the whole movie, followed very closely by John Malkovich's monologue. Yeah. But, like, everything in between that, there's no underlying menace when he's being charming. Like, it's not like,
I think that's half the point.
I was just going to say, my argument is they're not showing any of the killings. Yeah, they're showing Ted Bundy in real life, who was not a menacing person. Like, they mentioned, I think, because one of the scariest things,
like, when they show the real stuff at the end, like, there's an air behind it. Like, there's something there when they're showing the real footage that's eerier than when they're reenacting it. You know what I mean?
I think, for me, I feel that too. But I think that's subconsciously, because I know Ted Bundy, the real person, is a effing horrible human being, and Zac Efron is a goddamn sweetheart.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. So I think
there's, like, you nailed my issue with this movie.
Zac Efron should have gone full meta and murdered a bunch of people, so you realized he's a horrible person. So Armie Hammer should have played this.
Yes, Armie Hammer.
Allegedly.
No, but you know what I mean, though, right? Like, there's just something about, like, I would never take away from the fact that Efron gives a great performance in this. I just question. I don't question the movie's intentions, but I question the end result. I don't necessarily think this movie says what they want it to say particularly well. You know what I mean? Like, I think the movie itself undercuts its own message simply by existing. I think that, like,
how do you like give your message if you don't exist? Like, at this point right now, you're just going into, like, a Back to the Future paradox here, Sam.
Well, it is kind of, right? Like, no, okay, I'm having a hard time explaining this. But, like, this movie is trying to show how scary Ted Bundy was by showing how not scary he was.
Mm-hmm.
Showing that he didn't seem like a threat, showing the charismatic, like, hey, kind of thing he did, and only sparingly showing that he was actually a legitimate monster.
See,
There are very fleeting moments in this movie where they actually condemn him. And that's my biggest issue.
I will give you my 2 cents from a different line of sight here. Is if there's one thing that and this isn't knocking anything from what Casey's saying, because I think Casey and I are somewhat on the same wavelength here. But you live, breathe, and die by horror movies. By what can scare you, what can push that envelope for you, right? I like my horror movies, but you guys put me to absolute shame, and I can accept that, right? I go into this movie seeing a different kind of horror because of the lack of horror that I'm getting out of it. For me, what is scary about Ted Bundy and the way this is all done is because we don't get those things. Like Casey said, up until we don't get any of the killings. All we have is the 100% denial of this man who he's claiming that he didn't do any of these things over that 10 years while he's being prosecuted, and for someone to, finally in 1989, when he finally confesses, when he basically is executed, that's what's scary. Is you think how many people you walk by on a daily basis that could be your Ted Bundy. You don't know who they are because they are the nicest person that you ever met until you saw them on the news. And Lily's conflict throughout the entire movie is wondering, would it have happened? Would he still have kept on going if it weren't for the fact that I called a number because my boyfriend happened to look like the sketch?
I think the movie says its message in that final scene between Zac Efron and Lily Collins, where Ted Bundy delivers this monologue of, I have it right here, I'm just going to read it because people don't realize that murderers do not come out of the dark with long teeth and saliva dripping off their chin. People don't realize that that there are killers among them, people they liked, loved, lived with, work with, and admire could the next day turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable. And that's what Ted Bundy was. He's the definition of that. He's not Jeffrey Dahmer or Ed Gein, where he's
John Wayne Gacy.
Already off. There's already a screw loose. You can tell that if you met those guys in real life right away. You can tell. You're like, I'm going to stay away from you a little bit. I'm going to keep my distance. There's something off with you. I know that.
He's not
Ted
wearing
Bundy
a black
is
trench
like,
coat.
I'm gonna buy this guy a beer. He's cool. I'd vote for him. And then when you realize he's worse than all of those people in many ways, committing some of the most heinous crimes, again, having a list of people, unfortunately, of 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 100 potential victims of his horrible crimes, and was able to get away with it that long. That's the scariest thing. Like, he's a guy in his court jumping out of a window and still gets away for a week. What? This is a guy who
goes through his prison light fixture.
Yeah.
And, oh yeah, we don't put you in solitary. We just put you back in Gen Pop.
John McClane's his way out of prison.
The movie sides you with him in those scenes. Like, you're literally rooting for him to evade police, and like, that's what
I'm not rooting for him.
I wasn't rooting for him.
What the movie is doing, and this
shouldn't be, but the movie's asking you to.
The movie is asking you to, because, and this is, I listened to an interview with Joe Berlinger, and this is what he said. He's like, every time I do show him escaping, that's one, because it actually happened. Two, I want the audience to feel like if he gets out, I want him to go to Elizabeth. Whether you want them to get together or you're terrified when he shows up at her house, that's the feeling he wants. And that's what I got every single time of, if he gets out, I know where he's going. And like, I got that feeling every time. Who's he going to go to? Who's the person he keeps calling on the phone? Who's the person that came to visit him in prison? It always has this sense of dread and fear. And I think that's what this movie does good with Elizabeth too, is that we're in her shoes during those of, like, when the cop shows up that one night and you hear the knock on the door immediately after she sees Ted escape, and you're like, oh shit, he's at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you do in that situation? I think the movie does a really good job of What would you do in that situation with her character of, what if you found out the person you love is an extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile human being? How do you react in those situations? And luckily for the real life person, she didn't have to confront him during that time, aside from on the phone and stuff. And when she finally does confront him, she already knows the truth. She just needs to hear it from his mouth and get closure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think that scene at the end is so powerful. One, it's extremely well acted.
Yeah, it's just a great scene, period.
And we get to finally, and I think for us as the audience, we would all agree that's when you get to see like true menace in Zac Efron from this movie. He has glimmers of it, but that's when you really see it. And for me, that's because that's when Elizabeth sees it for the first time. I've tried to harbor all these emotions inside of me. I didn't ever want to believe it. I always wanted to believe him. And when she's confronted with him face to face and he writes hacksaw, it's like, yeah, that is bone chilling. Whereas he can't even say it to her either.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the ending of this movie is incredible. And I think everything leading up to it leads to that payoff.
I think that's where we disagree. Is like I agree with you that the ending, like especially like the last 20 minutes, like the court scene up until the confession, like I'm hooked. I'm riveted that entire time. I think before that is where I have issues. I think it's mostly in the second act that I'm like, to me, the movie is aimless throughout its second act. Everything that it's doing doesn't, to me, propel anything forward, do anything thematically that you haven't already done, or that you're not going to do better later on in this movie. You know what I mean? I
think we've come to the conclusion Sam is just a negative Nancy for this movie.
I
get where you're coming from, and I think
it spins its wheels so much to where it's like we have two scenes that mirror each other in the cop pulling him over. Like they could have literally, it's almost Tommy Wiseau-ish with like copy pasting the sex scene. You know what I mean?
I think that kind of goes
to what happened in real life, and I think that's part of the reason. I think I get this why you're upset with how some of the things happen in this movie is because this is an upsetting movie because I want to put a little spin on it, and this came from an interview with Joe Berlinger he's like, imagine Ted Bundy, same guy, acts the exact same way, but he has a different skin color. He doesn't do any of this stuff. He gets arrested right away. No one's helping him load his kayak and on top of his bug. People are his friends are gonna see, him in the newspaper, see his name on a list, and see that this person owns a bug, and he's ending up in jail the next day. Like I think that's
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
and that's terrifying because this is a story that only could happen in America.
Yeah. And I would go back to also too, like you make the comment about like with the cops, it's basically rinse and repeat. And like you said, Casey, it's something this actually happened, and it mirrors just the same as how he talked to Lily versus how he talked to Susan. Is that he used what he knew would work. We only see two instances of when he speaks to the cops, gets pulled over, and is actually arrested. How many times did he do that before where that gaslighting spiel worked and just got off, went on to the next thing? So
right.
I think for him, it was a matter of showing that he used what he thought is his rinse and repeat over and over again to show, he's very very menacing.
It didn't work all of a sudden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We only see the instances of where it didn't work, but that's only two times. If we've got 30 known victims, that probably happened 15, 20 times where he got away with it.
Yeah.
I said the exact same thing.
Yeah. You guys have good points. I'm not and I don't necessarily dislike this movie. I think
the movie is fine because it's the acting is there, and I do get and understand some of like the pacing issues that you have, Sam. But
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of, like you said, Haley Joel Osment. He's doing great with what he has. He just doesn't get a lot to work with.
Yeah, they
Whether it
failed to
be,
give him or Lily
Mhm.
Collins until the very end really anything to do
so it's like
is my biggest issue.
I mean, for me personally, like, and this isn't even attributing to the work he did, but for me, like, the weakest out of like the known faces out of it, and that's partially just because I still can't get a character out of my head. Is for me, it's hard watching Jim Parsons as the prosecutor because all I can still picture is Sheldon Cooper. Like
Yeah.
he's for me, it's still so fresh. Big Bang is still so fresh for me that it's still hard to see Jim Parsons not look like Sheldon Cooper, whereas
I think he does
everybody
a
else
pretty
is
good
kind of
job with like his mannerisms and his voice
Yes,
to differentiate it enough, but I know what you mean.
yeah. But I mean, like with everybody else seems to be much more in the character and whatnot. And I think everybody does a great job with what they have. I just don't think that sometimes they aren't giving whether it be just enough screen time or the right amount of interaction throughout the movie to give you a more well balanced movie. I think the movie is just not exactly 100% balanced well, but it's not to take away from any of the people actually in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the weakest part for me is in that second act when we're with Haley Joel Osment and Lily Collins, just because they're not given anything to do, and I will
Yeah.
100% agree with that.
Hmm.
Their scene in the break
Honestly,
room is the best part that they have together, and that comes
yeah,
so early in their relationship that it never like all of a sudden he's just there all the time, but you don't really know how that came to be and what their relationship is even. And that's where I come from when I say like this movie seems very uninterested in what Lily Collins is doing. Like
the-
what is this other man that she's been hanging out with? Does she feel guilt or remorse for hanging out with him while theoretically she's still kind of attached to Ted? All like I just don't feel like it ever explores any of the deeper psychological things that could be happening to her aside from a very superficial barely scratch the surface until the very end.
I'll sort of disagree. I think they're more
Okay.
interested in telling the relationship story between Ted Bundy and Elizabeth. They don't care about. I don't even remember his name, Haley Joel Osment's character's name in
Yeah.
this movie.
Well, and
They're just
that's
not
a problem for
interested in
me.
telling that story. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that I can agree with is the weakest part. And clearly they're not interested in telling it, which for me is like, yeah, if you're going to tell a love story in this and try to give Lily Collins, Elizabeth, like how she would react to this. Yeah, I would focus more on her relationship with Ted Bundy than this other guy too, because again, it's a more interesting story to tell in a feature film than just a guy there. Like it's just a more interesting story to tell in this medium. If you're going to do a documentary, though, yeah, it's probably the other way around. You're probably going to explore her how she got out of that a little bit more. And for this, it
Yeah.
kind of the culmination of this movie really for me kind of overshadows the other two acts with her character of now we finally get this full circle closure for this character and her running down the hall and seeing all these people that she had seen before and didn't believe kind of coming to fruition it's heartbreaking. um
Yeah.
so I think that scene at the end of those two is just a perfect culmination for the story they're trying to tell and the two characters that they have um, in this movie. So I don't know. This movie works for me. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I don't think it's perfect. It's not
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, but
No.
it's a good movie. It is probably the best version you can tell of a like narrative feature Ted Bundy movie without it being gross or why are we doing this? Like why are we glorifying this? Like it
Hmm.
does a good job for me of not doing that of exploiting Ted Bundy and the victims of his heinous crimes. It just does a good job of us telling his story, but also through a different perspective. So I think this movie works really well. I would like to see Joe Berlinger do some more feature narratives. I think he has a knack for it. I think he has a good eye for.
He's made 2 features that weren't documentaries.
He
and
has,
this is one of them.
and I like both of them.
And I was gonna be like, and yes, he made one of your favorite sequels ever.
Yeah, Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows, which is also sort of a true crime documentary style. That movie rules. Go watch Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows. We might be talking about it here in the next 5 minutes, but who knows? This movie works really well. So for me, it does at least.
Yeah. I could see where you're coming. Like, I agree that it's not as exploitative as a lot of true crime pictures, and for that I'm very thankful. Like, we don't have, no clothes like in Bully, where it's like, oh, we're just gonna leer at teenagers for 2 hours. But like, I think there's a better movie. I think there's a better story in this movie that this movie is not particularly interested in telling. That's not to say this is a bad movie. I think it's very well acted. I think Efron as Bundy it's inspired casting. He does a really good job. I think this movie is straight up unnecessary, especially after Berlinger did a better job telling it in his docuseries.
Which I think he kind of agrees with. He's like, I didn't want to make this movie, except Netflix was like, hey, you already spent 3 years of your life with Ted Bundy. Do you want to direct this movie we have a script for?
That would so explain a lot of my issues with it. Oh my God. If he didn't want to direct this movie, like, no shit, because like half of the scenes
I'm not saying
so flat.
He didn't want to direct it, but it wasn't like, oh, I want to make this movie. This is my dream follow-up to making Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows. It's like, no, I made Blair Witch 2: Book of Shadows. I'll stick to documentaries for a while.
Okay, so no, but that reframes it a little bit and kind of validates a lot of what I feel like I think. But that's not to say that this movie is a total waste. This is the second time I've seen it because I watched it when it first came out. I like parts of this movie. I like the setup. I like the third act, especially like the last 15 minutes or so. The second act just very much loses me, and it lost me the first time, and it lost me again this time. I think that the story and the message gets muddled in that second act to where the movie doesn't know the point that it's trying to make. That being said, I have to admit, like, Efron just absolutely nails it in this movie. And I like this better than Bully. I rated it the same as Bully, but I like this better than Bully. I think I even like this. No, this is my third favorite movie that we've watched this month. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fine movie. It's 2 out of 5 for me. Like, it's not bad. It's not great. It's fine. Like, it's one that, hey, I revisited it. I probably will never revisit it again. Not for me like saying, oh, I hate this movie, but just because like it doesn't do much for me. It doesn't have that spark to me that feels like, oh, this is like a vital piece of cinema that I have to watch this. You know what I mean? It just doesn't have any nutritional value to me. And I don't know. It's a fun Zac Efron performance in a movie that I find kind of dull. So.
It's not his oat milk kind of movie.
Yeah.
It's a McDonald's movie. You eat it, you're like, all right, I was hungry, I needed to watch something, then you feel like shit afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what this movie is.
Before we get to our
cases like that was actually pretty good. Immense Letterboxd review.
This any day.
No, I can't top the best Letterboxd review for this movie, and I wish I thought of this. Someone posted one. It was like, final scene, Zac Efron, Where's the head? And then the next line is him. It's in the game. Because you got to put your head in the game.
Oh. Yeah, that's
Wow.
good. That's really good.
So whoever wrote that letterbox review, props to you.
The head, it's in the game. I saw that one too, and I didn't get it for a minute. I didn't get it until just now. Oh my god, that's hilarious. That's
Casey's
a next
over there
level
like, I
joke.
bow to that person.
I bow to that person and all of their High School Musical love.
Oh shit, that's funny.
Before we get to our double feature question, since Sam kind of brought it up, when we're at the end of this series here, let's kind of each of us quickly. What's our ranking for the 4 true crime movies? Yeah,
I think my number
What did we
one
talk
is
about again?
my number one is absolutely In Cold Blood. I think that movie is incredible. I rated it 4 stars on the episode. But I honestly, like, I can't find a friggin' fault with that movie. If I ever rewatch that, that might turn into a 4.5, 5-star movie for me. I really liked Summer of Sam, as flawed as it was. So I think that would be my number 2. I just think John Leguizamo and Adrian
hey,
Brody
he's Sid in Ice Age. Did you know that,
He's
Sam?
Sid in Ice Age, guys. Oh my god. I
Anyway.
seriously sat there and watched Sid videos for like 45 minutes yesterday after I found out.
I'm glad I could blow your mind with the yellow M&M too.
Yes, the JK. Jesus, oh my god. God, what was I talking about? Oh yeah,
Number 3.
So yeah, it was In Cold Blood, Summer of Sam. This one's definitely number 3 because Bully didn't work for me. Bully worked for me in one scene in particular, and other than that, Bully wasn't really my thing. So I'd say, yeah, In Cold Blood, Summer of Sam, the Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie that I'm not even going to try and say the name of, and then Bully. Yeah.
What about you, Casey?
Mine's In Cold Blood for sure is number 1. Like Sam was saying, if I rewatch that again, it might be bumped up to a 5-star movie. I gave it a 4.
Yeah.
I'd probably go this one next. I gave this one 3.5. Then I would say I think I gave everything else 3.5 too. But I would say Summer of Sam. I think, and then Bully. And I don't think there was a bad movie that we covered. I think all but In Cold Blood are flawed. But I think that we had quite an eclectic list, and I'm glad we got to watch all of them, which was all first-time watches for myself. So, which next month will be 2, so that'll be fun.
Oh, this was a first-time watch for you too?
Every movie we covered this month was a first-time watch.
Oh shit, I didn't know that. This was the only non-first-time watch that I had this month.
Yeah, and for me, the only first time or non-first time for me was Bully, because that was my recommendation in the first place.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit torn with trying to rank these 4 movies, only because of how late in the night that I was watching In Cold Blood and like half like spacey falling asleep
I remember
kind of
you
thing.
saying that, yeah.
To the point where I know I need to go back to rewatch it because of everything that I saw. I really enjoyed it. And I think they did very well. The problem is that like I don't remember much.
It's hard to be engaged when you're that tired.
Yeah, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning, you're like, black and white. I'm just gonna take a nap.
Especially with like the stark realism in that movie, like being so like grounded,
very much
and
so.
you're just very documentary like.
Yeah. I would say it's for me. It's kind of hard to kind of like judge these. That's why I like the 4 that we have for this series, because they're 4 very different kind of movies. To the point where like the only through line you have is that they are based on actual horrific events and whatnot, but there's so much 4 different kind of movies, because like you look at Summer of Sam, and you clearly that wouldn't be that kind of movie if it wasn't for the fact that it was a Spike Lee movie. If Bully was made by anybody else that wasn't Larry Clark, you would not have that kind of movie. So I find it I don't know, because I mean I really enjoyed this here, but I like, for instance, like I could put this on the same par as like Bully, for example, because I'm with Casey. For me, everything is kind of in that 3.5 mark. with all of them, because nothing for me really kind of stood out one over the other, but I think that's partly because the context is so much different across all 4 movies.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, they're all just number 1 asterisk.
Yeah, I think
That's fair.
this was a solid series.
Yeah.
Quite a few different movies, some acclaimed directors out here, and some big names in the true crime and genre as well throughout this. So,
Yeah.
I guess last question then: if you're going to pair Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile with another movie, what long-titled movie are you going to pair it with?
I have had this in my head. I mean, hell, I've had this in my head since the first time I watched this movie. The
Something
first time the
Scooby-Doo.
credits rolled on Extremely, no, but I would watch Scooby-Doo with anything. So you can always just assume that, like, if I don't pick, like, whatever movie I pick for my double feature, Scooby-Doo would also be a viable replacement. Like, that's just how I am. No,
Hashtag do
I'm gonna go with yeah, hashtag do heads. I'm gonna go with the movie that when the credits rolled on this one, the first time I watched it, my first immediate thought was, my friend Dahmer did this better. And so that's my double
Hardly
feature.
disagree.
My friend Dahmer, with an incredible performance from Ross Lynch. Whichever Wolf brother, I cannot tell those two apart. Whichever Wolf brother's in it, he's really good
Alex.
too. Alex Wolf, okay. I think that movie is impeccably acted. I think its story is heartbreaking. I think it does a lot of what this movie is trying to do, and clearly Casey and I disagree on this again, but in my opinion, does it better than this one. I think it's also a flawed movie. I would not give it more than about 3.5 stars, I think. But much like this one, I think it's an incredible, award-worthy performance in a movie that never quite matches up to what it is. So that would be my double feature. Plus, they're both ex-Disney Channel stars that have gone on to prove that they have incredible range.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I hope to see both Zac Efron and Ross Lynch take on more meaty, like, challenging roles like what they did in those 2 movies, because they really nailed it. And yeah, I hope more like indie films take a chance on them and let them get weird and really shine, because I think that both of them could have really cool, illustrious careers if they keep making interesting choices like this. So that's my double feature.
I would just like to point out I didn't realize Alex Wolf had an actor brother until you just said something.
Yeah, Naked Brothers Band.
Yeah, they're the Naked Brothers Band.
Yeah.
So my friend Dahmer stars a Disney star and a Nickelodeon
star.
No clue that there was
Already
anything
makes
Nickelodeon
it better
related.
than this piece of movie.
This one could have used the other wolf in here somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Make him give him the role that Jim Parsons took.
Yeah, why not? He'd be 20 years too young, but okay. Yeah, my friend Dahmer, I don't hate it. I think it's fine. For me, that's probably where you and I are just flip-flopped on that. I
feel like we just flip-flop on these movies, and that's fine.
Yeah. Mine, I'm gonna go with another Joe Berlinger movie. I want to say
Blair Witch 2.
Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. I'm not like Sam with Scooby-Doo, just pick any movie and I'm going to pair it with Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows, which is like a Scooby-Doo movie in a way. I'm going to go with the first Paradise Lost movie, though. That's the movie that really brought...
That's the West Memphis 3 one, right? Yeah.
The movie that really brought Joe Berlinger to fame. And again, something that this movie touches on, and all of his movies really touch on too, is how media affects these type of things, or how true crime influences media and vice versa. And for this, where he's covering the Ted Bundy trial, which is the first nationally televised, courtroom trial ever happening, and then that was in what 70, like late 70s, and then
Mhm.
20 years later, he's sitting in a courtroom shooting an HBO documentary about these three kids that are accused of murder.
Yeah.
Kind of this overall narrative that he likes to, that he's very, very in touch with and has an emotional connection to, that is kind of available in all of his movies. So I'm going to go with the first Paradise Lost, and I mean, you
I
can
still
watch
haven't
the other
seen
two right
any of
after.
those
But
movies. I really feel like I need to, because I read the book, one of the books. Maybe it was called Devil's Knot or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's such a fascinating story, but I've never watched I watched the movie Devil's Knot, which is
Which is
essentially a
okay.
made for TV. Yeah, it's fine. It feels very made for TV. It's got a really good Reese Witherspoon performance in it, and other than that, I can't really
got a great
recommend
cast,
it.
but that's about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Wait
So
till you guys watch Paradise Lost. Like it's
excited to check that out
it's
eventually.
incredible.
But I'm taking a break from true crime after this month, so
Yeah,
it'll
that is not
probably
the
be a few
movie.
months.
Especially the opening of that movie. That is not the movie you jump into right after we went through this month, because
Yeah.
where I talk about Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile does a good job of kind of straying away from like showing anything. The
Oh,
documentary just like opens with it with Metallica like under
Oh,
playing.
speaking of that, I would just like to point out, this is something I
wonderful.
was going to tell myself. I'm severely disappointed of the Blink and You Miss It Metallica cameo
Okay,
in
where
this
is he?
movie.
Where is he at? Because I saw his name in the credits, and I'm like, I remember he was supposed to be in this. I don't.
Yes,
Where is he at?
at the very beginning when Ted Bundy first gets arrested, he is the police officer that comes in with the detective to question him at the very beginning. He's the one that unloads the box of all of the goodies at the very beginning when he first gets arrested.
So for
And
those people
Oh,
questioning,
okay.
James Hetfield is in this movie.
yes,
Good friend of Joe Berlinger.
yes.
So yeah.
That was one of those things I remember seeing the trailer and I'm like, oh yes, and I didn't realize it was literally a 1 second cameo basically.
Nice.
But what am I the only? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I knew what to go look for because that was like the one thing I remembered from the trailer.
I forgot about that until I saw his name in the credits. I'm like, oh, that's right. Where was he?
Yep. Well, because he wasn't having that Metallica flowing long flocky hair. You know, he's had it all that crew cut for how many years?
This movie, what this movie needed though, is like Ted
More
Bundy
Metallica.
running out of prison to enter Sandman, and it's just then we're really on his side. Like, yeah, go get him, Ted. Get out of here.
So I will quick say in terms so we can wrap this up here for you, Casey, is I want to just go lighthearted and whatnot. Like if you're gonna start with this, just end with like something with like Neighbors or something like that. Just keep the Zac Efron train moving and leave on a smile
Yeah.
because you clearly are not going to leave on a smile with this. So start with this,
Oh, yeah.
whether it be like Neighbors. I've never seen Neighbors 2. I'm told I really need
fun.
to. But I mean,
Brian, you'll love Neighbors
anything
too. It's even better than the first.
but anything that is Zac Efron doing funny comedy and whatnot, because I would even say, just throw Baywatch on just for something stupid fun, just to kind
He's
of
so
realize,
funny in Baywatch. That movie's
if
so
there's
bad, but he's so funny.
exactly, because if there's one thing these movies have been able to prove is Efron, he's got a great charisma. He's got great charisma no matter what he's typically doing. But it just depends on the character and whatnot. And so you can see two different versions of his charisma between like this and like Baywatch. Or this and like Neighbors.
This and High School Musical.
You're right. Now that I've
I'm
gotten
not
my
going
diss in and I've said that my friend Dahmer is a better movie, I'm switching up my double feature to Dirty Grandpa, which works because many people have said that movie is a crime against cinema. So it still fits with the true crime motif, and I love it. So
Good answer.
All right. Well, let's wrap this thing up. This has been our episode on Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. What a long title. Yeah, that ends True Crime Month here for us here at Backlot 605.
we
I
made
think
it, guys.
we made it. We're there. On to next month, and then for the month of February, we're going to be covering Viola Davis movies That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Suicide Squad. The Suicide. No, we're not covering either of those movies. We're going to be covering
Hey,
We're going to be
get-
covering Get
make-
On Up, Widows, The Help, and Fences for next month.
I would just like
Which
to
one
point
is
out.
the first one up? I can't remember. I haven't looked at the schedule.
Get On Up.
You
Okay.
give shit about the Suicide Squad or Suicide Squad. Amanda Waller and Viola Davis is not the weak link of either of those two movies.
No.
No, she's
Because
good. I just don't
because
want to
she's
watch either.
amazing.
Yeah. She's the best part of the 2016 one for sure. We're doing Get On Up next week. Oh, good. That should be at least like, James Brown, he's fun and funky. I was like, God forbid we do, like, I love Widows, but God forbid we do Widows next month or next week because, God, that's going to be so heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys seen Widows yet? I know, Casey, you haven't. Brian, have you seen Widows? Oh, God, I'm stoked, guys. I'm stoked to talk that one.
I picked it up on the cheap a long time ago, and I just never got around to watching it. So
Yeah.
it's
I picked it up on
it's
sale
in my
and watched
library
it,
rating.
Yeah. I'm excited. I think you guys are going to dig it.
Yes, so Viola Davis month, February this year. We're going to be talking quite an eclectic list of movies for this month. So that should be a ton of fun talking Viola Davis movies. And then we'll get to March and we'll have some real fun of movies we have all seen multiple times, many times. We're just not going to tell you. We're not going to tell them yet.
Okay, tell me off camera because I forgot already.
There's a movie coming out in March that is related to the topic that we're doing, Sam. I'll tell you off air if you can't figure it out.
Okay.
Let's get to the plugs for the show. If you are listening to this on the day this is dropping, on the 26th, we do have another film community meetup at Full Circle from 6 till 8, 9, 10, who knows, coming here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So again, Full Circle Book Co-op tonight. And then we also have the Schmuckies Movie Awards, variety show, comedy, music, movies, magic. We got it all. And there's going to be a Charlie Eccles there too. That's coming up Thursday, the 10th at 7 p.m. Spellbound Magic Shop. You can check out more info on our Facebook page for that event. Sam just figured out which movies we are covering in March.
Oh man, I just got really excited for March, guys.
We're getting there, Sam. But you can subscribe to this podcast to hear our Viola Davis series and whatever we're going to cover in March. Who knows? You can subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, Stitcher, and on YouTube to see our lovely faces. Where can they find us on social media, Brian?
They can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd HQ, all at Backlot 605. You can also check us out on the South Dakota Film Community Group on Facebook. Join the conversation. People like us, filmmakers, film enthusiasts, film lovers, just people who like talking about movies. Sam, where else can they find us?
If you like this and you want more, you can join us on patreon.com/backlot605 for 4 bonus episodes each month. We're going to be wrapping up January with an episode on one of my most anticipated 2022 movies, Hotel Transylvania 4, Transformania. And I've already watched it. I can't wait to watch it a second time before we talk about it. I'm stoked. I hope you guys like it. In the month of February, we've got some interesting episodes. We've got a poll going out for rom-com. We've each picked one rom-com that you can vote on Patreon to see which one we're going to do.
Do you need the list, Sam?
I do. I don't know. I know for getting Sarah Marshall's on it, I can't even remember my own.
We have to figure out the poll yet. Let's just leave it at there's going to be a Valentine's themed movie.
Yes, there's going to be a Valentine's themed movie.
And it is not the Kevin James Netflix comedy Home Team, but that is another movie we are going to be covering. Oh boy.
Yes, I forgot about that one. I'm so excited for that.
Another Netflix movie we're going to be covering, the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we're going to be doing a recap of the Schmuckies Movie Awards, as Sam has just given up as we
You say Kevin
mention of
James, and he just popped off.
of Kevin James scares Sam away. But yeah, home team, a Valentine's movie, the Schmuckies recap, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So that's what we got to look forward to on Patreon.
Yeah,
man, this episode's just been me discovering what we've got planned again, and I'm just getting excited. I don't know why my brain is like farting out tonight, guys. I can't remember anything.
I hope everybody else feels just excited as we are for what we got coming up. So yeah, check us out on all those platforms that we said we are on, because that's where we're at. That sounded like Perd Hapley just talking there, but that's okay. Let's wrap this thing up here. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for checking out the show. For Sam Lenz, Brian Mensing, I am Casey Keldon. We will check y'all out next time, right here on the Backlot of South Dakota.
bye.
Peace.